You know, have you ever really stopped to think about how a map can be a history book? Today, we're going to explore how one family's story in South Carolina isn't just sitting in some dusty archive. Nope. It's literally etched into the rivers, the crossroads, and the towns you can still pull up on a map today. So, this is really our big idea for today. Instead of old books, our main text is the landscape of South Carolina itself. We're going to follow in the footsteps of one family, the DuBose family, to see how they left a permanent mark on the geography we all see today. All right, let's kick off our tour and see exactly how a simple place name can tell a massive story. So, the family at the heart of our story is the DuBose family. Their journey, stretching across centuries, is a perfect illustration of this really deep connection between people, places, and, that grand sweep of history. Okay, so our journey is going to start right where their American story kicked off, in the coastal lowcountry of South Carolina. This was basically their cradle in the New World. I want you to picture this. It's the 1680s. A man named Isaac DuBose steps onto a piece of land he's been granted, right on the Santee River. Just try to imagine his perspective. This wasn't just some new plot of land. It was a hot, humid, subtropical wilderness, a completely different world from his home in France. So you gotta ask, why would anyone leave France for a place like that? Well, the answer is absolutely crucial. Isaac DuBose was a Huguenot, which means he was a French Protestant fleeing intense religious persecution. He wasn't an adventurer looking for gold. He was a refugee, plain and simple, just looking for a place to survive. And what's incredible is how quickly their story changed. I mean, it was swift and really dramatic. They show up in the 1680s as refugees, right? But just a few decades later, they're moving inland, setting up these very profitable plantations, and by the mid-1700s, they had completely blended into the powerful, English-speaking planter class. That's a huge leap in just 2 generations. Just remarkable. But all that success on the coast, that was really just the beginning. As the family got more powerful, their footprint on the land got bigger, and they started expanding inland, into the part of the state we call the Midlands. So this next part of the story happens right around the time of the Revolutionary War. The family starts pushing into what was, back then, the wild frontier of the old Cheras district. And this is where a really key landmark shows up on our historical map, one that, you guessed it, still has their name on it. And that brings up a pretty interesting question, right? What exactly was DuBose's Crossing? I mean, the name sounds super historic, but what was it actually? What did it mean back then? Well, you have to understand, a ferry back in the 18th century was way more than just a boat. DuBose's Crossing on the Lynches River was basically critical infrastructure. It was a landmark for anyone traveling through, it was a place to get news, it was a hub for local business. The fact that it even existed tells you a lot about how much influence the family was starting to have in that whole region. All right, let's jump forward in time a bit. We're now in the antebellum period. That's the time right before the Civil War. By this point, the DuBose family are solid members of the planter elite, and their whole way of life starts to shape the land around them in some pretty fascinating ways. So their main base of operations, if you will, was now in the Darlington and Kershaw districts. And it's here that their lifestyle created this really specific, kind of unique type of community. And it wasn't a place for living year-round. It was actually built for escape. They called them summer villages, and a good example is one named Springville. See, during those brutally hot summer months, wealthy planters would literally pack up their families and get away from their hot, swampy plantations, which were often full of disease, and they'd head for the healthier, cooler air of these villages built up in the pinelands. So what was the point of all this? Well, a big part of it was health. Escaping diseases like malaria was a very real life-or-death concern. But it wasn't just that. These villages were also the social hotspots. They were basically exclusive communities built on this seasonal travel, and they were designed to keep all the prominent families in the district connected and socializing. Okay, so we've traveled through a few centuries of the past. But what's left today? Let's bring our little tour right into the present and see if we can find the echoes of this history still on the ground. And even though most of the original buildings are long gone, the links to the past are still there. You can actually go and find historical markers at places like DuBose's Crossing. You can find old family cemeteries tucked away. But the most common clue, the one you see all over the place, is right there in the names.
And this, right here, is really the heart of the whole story. You have these real, physical working places, ferries, plantations, whole villages. And over time, they've transformed. They're not buildings anymore. They're historical markers. They're names you see on a map. They're the echoes of one family's journey, written right onto the land.
So in the end, it all comes down to this. From the tidal creeks down in the low country, all the way up to the pinelands of the Midlands, the geography of South Carolina itself kind of became a silent witness to their story. And the names on the land, they're the proof. They're a testament to that family's presence and their influence over hundreds of years. And, this way of looking at a map, it's not just about one family in South Carolina. It's really a lens you can use to see history hiding in plain sight, right where you live. Which kind of leaves us with a final thought for you to chew on. What names on the land where you are, the streets, the parks, the rivers, what stories do they tell about your community?